Hello. Welcome to another episode of Excuse Me, Doctor. My name is Dr. Melissa Clarke, and I am here every week to empower you, the viewers and the listeners, with the information that you need to make wise decisions about your health, the health of your family, and the health of your community. It's so important to make decisions now using factual information and not speculation, misinformation, because the stakes are so high, especially now. So, welcome all my listeners, especially those tuning in on Facebook and YouTube. If you're listening for the first time and viewing for the first time, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Please hit follow if you're checking us out on Facebook, and also subscribe if you're checking us out on YouTube. So tonight is going to be an amazing show. And I'm really glad you're here for this because we are in unprecedented times. There's always been some level of skepticism when it comes to the government, but never has it been this tsunami of misinformation that's happening and the need to check facts that we're hearing in real time to make sure that we're distinguishing fact from fiction. And all this in the middle of a pandemic when it's so crucial that we get the right information so that we can make our decisions. You know, that was why I started Excuse Me, Doctor, the show in the first place, because I really felt that there needed to be a platform where people could come for trusted health information. Many people are just kind of throwing their hands up in the air now and saying, I don't trust this administration. I don't trust what I'm hearing from the government. I'm just not going to go with anything that I hear them say. But do we throw the baby out with the bathwater? Do we find other organizations and sources to go to for trusted information? And how do we discern fact from fiction? We have a dynamic panel that's going to talk to us about all this. It includes radio personality Russ Parr, Dr. Leon Mcdougall, the 121st president of the National Medical Association, and healthcare journalist Carrie Dooley, who are going to help me with tackling all these questions, as well as your questions that you type in. So please start typing those in now. The sooner you get them in, the sooner we're going to get to them, because I know you have a lot of them. So with that, we are going to first, as always, start off with our weekly recap, because there's so much that's happened since I last saw you just a week ago that even I, as a physician, have a hard time keeping up. So let's move to the weekly recap. And as we start with the weekly recap, I always start with numbers. What you're seeing right here is a graphic that really shows what has happened with deaths worldwide. So along the bottom are the months. From March to May, you see, we were kind of along the same line as the rest of the world. And then May, we just kind of skyrocketed in terms of the amount of death that we saw in this country from COVID-19. We're somewhere up at the very top of that curve. Other countries found a way to flatten their curves, and unfortunately, we have yet to be successful with that. And so that kind of brings me to the numbers. We're at 7.2 million cases and counting. It took just 25 days to go from 6 million to 7 million. And 23 states are now reporting increases in their numbers. We were at about 30,000 cases on average a day. Now we just in the past week or so, we've gone up to 43,000 cases a day. So we're going in the wrong direction as we head into the winter, as we head into where schools and stores are reopening, and where flu season is coming on. So now is not the time to pull back. Now is a time to be more vigilant than ever as the weather gets colder and things move indoors. We heard at a briefing this week that only 10% of the United States population has been exposed and gotten coronavirus. That means that 90% of us are still vulnerable. And then we talked about deaths. We're over 208,000 deaths in the United States. There's still disproportionate death among Black, Indigenous, and Latino Americans. But it's also important to note that over 100,000 white Americans have died. And I emphasize this just to say that everybody is vulnerable. But I want to leave you with some good news. And that's that there is a state in the United States that I'm calling the COVID-19 rock star. And that's because they're doing a great job, especially when it comes to the disproportionate cases and deaths among African Americans. That state is Michigan, where African Americans are 15% of the population, and at the beginning of the pandemic accounted for about 30% of cases and 40% of deaths. But now they have been able to get that down to about 8 to 10% of cases and deaths attributed to African Americans. How did they do that when the rest of the country has yet to address that? Well, what they did early on was they spent dollars on things that were important: increasing testing to communities of color, increasing distribution of masks, providing assistance with food and housing, and having targeted messages to the Black community about how to stay safe with COVID-19. So that's how they did it, and it can be done everywhere. The next thing that I want to talk about is our vaccine update. Now, I'm going to be including this as a segment every week because as we get closer and closer to when these drug companies start to submit data to the FDA, I want to make sure that you're up to date with the most cutting edge information. So several vaccines have been developed, but they're not up for FDA review until November or December. So that's definitely not going to be that there's some kind of approval of a vaccine before the election. It's just highly, highly unlikely. And when you talk about people actually getting a vaccine, if it were to be approved, we're talking about like a year from now, by the time you account for distribution and rollout to all the states and all the populations that need to get it. The leading companies like Moderna and Pfizer, they have a vaccine that has 2 doses, but Johnson & Johnson has a vaccine that's 1 dose. And Merck, which did not enter the arena until late, they are actually not being funded by Operation Warp Speed because they kind of got in a little bit late. They have an oral vaccine that they're working on. So that's important to know. And again, I will be in this space to give you updates on that on a regular basis. The next thing is airlines are testing for COVID-19. So, when you go to a destination like Hawaii, for example, you have to quarantine for 2 weeks. I don't know if you knew that because I know a lot of people aren't traveling, but that's the case. Now, United Airlines has entered into a partnership with a company that's going to do on-site testing at the airport before you get on the plane. You get the answer in 15 minutes, or you can send in a test from home 2 days in advance. And if you test negative, you can get on the plane, go to Hawaii, and go to the beach immediately without having to quarantine. And so this is important to know. It's also important to know that the test they're using has up to a 20% false negative rate. So if you test positive, that's pretty reliable. But if the test comes back negative, about 20% of the time it's wrong. There are other options out there for rapid tests that are more accurate. But this particular test, which is from Abbott, actually kind of got boosted a lot because the White House is using it. So that's important to keep in mind in terms of checking with your doctor or with the company in terms of how reliable the test is. The next thing I want to talk about is how African countries have been successfully fighting COVID-19. Let's talk about Uganda. They were projected to have 600,000 cases and 30,000 deaths. As of today, they've only had 7,000 cases and 70 deaths. Look at South Africa, the hardest hit of all the African countries. They have a death rate of 28 per 100,000 as compared to the United States, which is 61 per 100,000. And there have been a lot of speculation as to why African countries have been doing well. Early aggressive action, experience fighting up their epidemics, population spending more time outdoors and therefore less spread of the virus and less vitamin D deficiency in the population. And also the fact that their population is younger. On average, only 3% of people are over 65. But this is the bottom line. Black people don't have a genetic advantage in fighting COVID-19. I know you know that was a rumor early on, but as soon as Idris Elba got it, that dispelled it for a lot of people, and a lot of people stood up and paid attention. But the other fact is that African Americans, it clearly shows that African Americans don't have to suffer disproportionately from coronavirus. There are other Black people in the world who are doing well, and that's because, as in Michigan, the COVID-19 epidemic has been handled responsibly and effectively. And then the last thing I want to talk about on the recap is, can mask use lead to immunity? How does that work? Well, the amount of virus that you're exposed to when you get an infection may determine how sick you get. So it's sort of like alcohol. The more you drink, the drunker you get. Well, the more virus you're exposed to, the sicker you get, because your immune system initially gets overwhelmed. So there's a theory that face masks can cut down on how much virus you get exposed to. And as a result of using your mask, your infection, should you get it, is milder or even without symptoms. And so, of course, then the next time you're exposed to the virus, if you've had a mild infection or asymptomatic infection, you either you don't get sick because you have some level of immunity. So that's how it works. And it's yet another reason to wear your mask. So that is it for our weekly recap. Let us move into our weekly debunk.
The weekly debunk. Stopping misinformation in its tracks.
I heard 45 say that the COVID only gets elderly people with heart problems and otherwise has affected virtually nobody. Excuse me, Dr. Mel, is that true?
No, that is absolutely not true, but it's an excellent question. And I'll just say this. Tell that to the 1,200 healthcare workers who have died of COVID-19, or those who are still alive, who are on the front line, who are exposing themselves every day and are seeing long haulers, people who now have asthma-like illnesses, or people who are who've been in a coma for a month and have had to go to rehab and learn how to walk because of the severity of the COVID-19 infection they had. Tell that to the families of 450 pregnant women across the Americas who've died from COVID-19, or the 600 plus children who've been hospitalized with COVID-19, 70% of them being children of color. Tell that to 41-year-old Nick Cordero's wife, the 6.5-foot Broadway actor who unfortunately died from a coronavirus infection. Or tell that to 30-year-olds who are getting intubated and placed on ventilators in hospitals across the country. We've lost over 200,000 souls in the United States from this virus. We're getting closer to winter, as I said before, and now is not the time for this kind of information to be in circulation to make people think that they're not vulnerable or that the epidemic is over or the pandemic is over. So that's our weekly debunk. We're now going to move in to tonight's topic, which I know you all have been eagerly awaiting. And, I'm just going to start off by saying, who and what are we to believe in this pandemic? There is a crisis of faith in our government institutions. For African Americans, you might say that we really never had a great deal of faith in government institutions, but at least we were not aware of being misled in real time. But with this COVID-19 epidemic, we started getting assaulted in February with misinformation. So in February, the coronavirus will weaken when the weather gets warmer. In March, anybody that needs a test can get one. Testing still is not where it needs to be. In April, the outbreak was going to be temporary. It's going to disappear like a miracle. May, coronavirus numbers are looking much better. They're going way down. June, the pandemic is fading away. July, 99% of COVID cases are totally harmless. August, we have the lowest fatality from coronavirus. As you saw by that graph, that's not the case. Late August, a coronavirus will be ready by Election Day. We've debunked that. And then just last week, it affects elderly patients and people with heart problems, not young people. And of course, we just debunked that. So these and other multiple statements, as well as actions like holding rallies without mass or social distancing and altering FDA and CDC established procedures, have really deepened mistrust of government. And as we move closer to the vaccine trial review and deaths are starting to go up, it's really important that we answer this question. So tonight, I have a fantastic panel standing by to help us decide what to do in the face of this unprecedented concern about confidence from our government when it comes to the handling of health information in a pandemic. Our first guest is Russ Parr. He is a super radio personality. He's also a film director, writer, and actor, but he is best known as the host of the nationally syndicated Russ Parr Morning Show, heard weekdays by more than 3 million viewers in 45 cities. His show not only entertains, but it keeps us informed of current events. Welcome, Russ. Thank you so much for being here.
It's an honor to be here, Dr. Clarke.
Absolutely. And then our next guest is Dr. Leon Mcdougall. He's a family medicine physician. He's the first chief diversity officer of the Ohio State University Wexner Medical Center. But just last month, he became the 121st president of the National Medical Association, the oldest and largest collective voice of African-American physicians in the country, of which I am proud to be a part. Thank you, Dr. Mcdougall, for joining us.
Thanks, Dr. Clarke.
And last but not least, we have Carrie Dooley Young. She's an experienced journalist who covers federal health policy at Bloomberg, or for Bloomberg, and for the Congressional Quarterly, but now does it on a freelance basis. Because of her experience, she serves as a resource to non-health journalists on how to cover important healthcare issues like COVID-19. Welcome, Carrie. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
So I'm going to just jump right into this because we have so much ground to cover. I'm going to start with you, Carrie. You've been a healthcare journalist for over 20 years. How have you ever seen healthcare information from the government seemingly mishandled like this in your previous, in the totality of your career?
You know, it's been so many things. There have been so many missteps, and we're in the midst of a pandemic. There are always going to be things that go wrong, but as we had been discussing, there are some real missed opportunities here, especially with we could have had a chance perhaps to build confidence in all vaccines. Instead, the kind of over-promising on deadlines is making everyone suspicious about a product we're all really looking forward to. I mean, as we discussed the idea that we could have vaccines next year, that's a scientific win. I mean, that's something that's really interesting. And instead, they'll come to market if we get them next year with the perception for many people about, well, weren't they promised last year and why are they late? So that does seem a missed opportunity.
Absolutely. And I think that's a very diplomatic way of saying it's a missed opportunity. Russ, I just want to move to you. You have a huge audience. And, you know, I'm so impressed when I listen to you because it sounds like you're very much in touch with your audience and what they're thinking, and you're able to address a lot of what their concerns are. What was your initial reaction when you realized that this misinformation was coming down the pike and there were these changing facts? How have you adjusted how you've dealt with that with your audience who listens to you and trusts you?
Well, one of the first things we did is we got you on the show, which really helps because you're one of the leading voices out here. The other thing is that, and I hate to make it political, but we have no choice but to do that. The fact that we have a president who has reckless disregard for the American lives, that look to him for leadership. And nobody really wants to say it, but we have a lot of our CDC, the FDA, and Dr. Fauci, Dr. Birx, all of them are being compromised. Their reputations are being compromised. And that's why we're getting disinformation, because at the end of the day, there is an agenda. The agenda for the president of the United States is to get reelected. The problem that we have is that we don't know what to believe. 1 minute, the CDC puts out some guidelines, and then they pull it back after the president is briefed on, here's what they said, because he doesn't understand what was put out. What happens is it's like, hey, listen, this is going against what we're pushing. So therefore, we have all this confusion, and everybody is scared. Everybody that I talk to that calls my show are just frightened because we don't know who to believe. So we're sitting here like sitting ducks, like guinea pigs. And like Carrie said, you know, we may have a vaccine that nobody is going to take because we don't trust it. Warp speed means it was done quickly, which means that there could be some efficacy problems. You know, do we want to be Tuskegee Airmen? I mean, do we want to go through this? The basically being guinea pigs, and that's the problem that we have, is that we have so many people that are sitting here. We want to believe and trust our government. But I listen to one person, that's Dr. Fauci. He's the only one that's been credible. He's the only one that I feel that has not been compromised. Dr. Birx, even though she's coming around now because they have this snud up in the White House that Trump found on Fox News, and they like the way he looked, and he has his hair and the whole nine. Yeah. And today, you heard about Dr. Redfield from the CDC was on the airplane. Yeah. This guy is wrong about everything.
Yeah, he was questioning Dr. Atlas. I want to circle back to one of the things you said, that your listeners are terrified. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, how is this affecting the Black community specifically, who are already concerned and hypervigilant when it comes to information from the government? Dr. Mcdougall, well, I just want to move to Dr. Mcdougall for a moment. The NMA has taken this bold stance. Can you describe what that is and why you felt that it was necessary to address some of the very things that Russ so eloquently just mentioned?
The National
Go ahead, we can hear you.
The National Medical Association, we have concerns. So Dr. Rodney Hood and Dr. Jennifer Walton introduced a resolution to the House of Delegates that passed unanimously on August 4th to establish a COVID-19 task force on vaccines and therapeutics, because you are correct. There is a cloud of political influence that appears to be affecting decisions that are being made. Let's go back to hydroxychloroquine that was given emergency use authorization by the FDA, and not long afterward find that it caused adverse serious cardiac events. So that emergency use authorization was revoked. Then let's speak to most recently on August 23rd, convalescent plasma was given emergency use authorization. Guess what date that was? One day before the Republican National Convention. And hold the phone. What happened? Not too long afterward, a panel of National Institutes of Health scientists put out a statement stating that there were insufficient data to support use of convalescent plasma for treatment of COVID-19. And in fact, it should not be considered a standard of care. And furthermore, that randomized prospective clinical trials would be needed to prove its safety and efficacy. So the theme of this evening is correct and on target, and being a nonpartisan, independent voice that has a connection to the community. We serve the African American community, and we want to help speak that truth and evaluate the data in regards to these clinical trials.
So I want to ask you, just from and by the way, the National Medical Association was covered front page of the Washington Post this weekend, this announcement that you made. How do you logistically see getting this information out once the task force makes its recommendations? How do you see getting that information out to the Black community and anybody else who's interested?
So there's this organization called the National Association of Black Journalists. So I'm pretty sure Russ Parr belongs to that. We're going to use Black media outlets, and in my role as president, I've let our media consultants know that I want to talk to Black people. So that's first and foremost on our agenda. So we have those connections. We will also be in collaboration with the Consortium of Black Medical Schools, blackdoctor.com, other organizations such as the Urban League. So we will be able to share our thoughts concerning these important issues.
Thank you.
Can I add
Russ,
something right
please,
quick?
go ahead.
Do you mind? Dr. Mcdougall is correct. We do have a problem. And first of all, I meant to say Tuskegee experiment, so it was a slip of the tongue. But the problem that I have is that I can talk till I'm blue in the face to a lot of my listeners. And if for some reason it's just not registering, because I literally have cried on the air to get people to listen to what we are trying to say. But lo and behold, the next weekend, there's a party, there's a pool party. There are folks that feel like, hey, it doesn't affect me. That early on, what you mentioned earlier on, Dr. Clarke, about that we don't get it and our DNA keeps us from getting COVID, has stuck. I still have people to this day telling me that information because we're not consumers of information that's coming to us. I have it in my own family. They're having parties in Texas.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous. And they don't even know that just because you get a test, well, I got tested 3 weeks ago. You could get infected an hour later.
Yes.
And mask. Texas is wide open. Florida is wide open.
Yes.
And Black folks, I've been talking to Black folks for 40 years on the radio. They're not even listening. And you shouldn't have me on this show because I'm very passionate about this.
I know.
I'm going to get upset. But I'm just saying that I don't have you, Dr. Mcdougall. I think it's wonderful what you're saying. Let's reach out and we're going to go to all these medias. These people our people don't care. They think they're not vulnerable. They feel that, hey, I can survive this. And they realize we're done.
Yeah, you make some great points, but and one of the other things I want to talk about too is it seems unrelated, but when you get decisions being handed down, say from the Kentucky Attorney General in the case of Breonna Taylor, how does that deepen the chasm between what comes from official sources to a population that already feels vulnerable, Russ? I mean, I don't think it's just that we don't care. I think it's also too that
trust.
The trust. Yeah.
There's no trust. So, we need people like Carrie and other journalists that are going to stand up to this administration and ask the right questions. And there are a few people that are not afraid to tell the truth, like Dr. Fauci. You can tell when he's been under duress. You can read all these books that have just come out and they're talking about, hey, when Dr. Fauci says something against the president, they sideline him. He sits on the side. Dr. Birx went along these are career professionals.
Yeah.
These are career professionals that are ruining their reputations to protect somebody who's has their own agenda.
Yeah. So you mentioned Carrie, and I want to bring her back into the conversation because she serves as a resource to journalists about how to cover the coronavirus correctly. So what would you say as, to non-healthcare journalists, maybe some who are in NABJ or otherwise, about asking the right questions, about reviewing the data appropriately and getting the message out?
Well, first, though, I have to agree with Russ that, in this, Dr. Fauci has been, it's not just in coronavirus. When we go back to the Ebola, when we go back to any number of infectious disease outbreaks in this country, Dr. Fauci for decades has been sort of America's infectious disease doctor. He's done it for Republican presidents, Democratic presidents. So just to your point, Russ, he is a voice we trust. When you're listening to a press conference, administration this, administration officials talk about that. You're listening, you're taking notes. But when you hear that Brooklyn accent, your ears pick up. You start paying attention.
Yes.
You know that the truth will be told.
So,
in terms of any kind of reporting, you need to not accept anybody's word, right? So when you're reading as a news consumer, we were talking about this a little bit, Dr. Clarke. It's like when you're buying food in the supermarket, you look at that label, right? Mm-hmm. You look at the story. If they mention a document or a study, there should be a link. And if there's not, tweet at that reporter and say, hey, you mentioned the president said there's an executive order, which is a whole other topic. Where's the link to that? Can I see that myself? You know, if they mention anything, if they mention, there should usually be more than one voice in the story. Even the best person, right? Even if it's a great researcher who does beautiful work and it's been published in, you know, JAMA or New England Journal, somebody else should be quoted. You have to be skeptical of everybody. There's that Russian saying, trust but verify. Journalists don't even trust. We just verify.
Absolutely. And you know, Russ made some fantastic points, Dr. Mcdougall. You know, but one of the people that Black people do trust is their Black doctor. What is the NMA doing in terms of the messaging that doctors should be doing for their patients in terms of COVID-19?
So good question, Dr. Clarke. On our NMA.net website, we have information concerning this initiative. The people involved include physicians who belong to the Infectious Disease Society of America, the Pediatric Infectious Disease Society, the ACIP Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices from the CDC, the CDC Health Equity Group. We've also collaborated with the National Pharmaceutical Association, our Black pharmacists, and COVID-19 and this pandemic as a whole has really brought to the forefront the need, again, to increase the number of African-American healthcare professionals. And we are collaborating to combat this pandemic. And so, yes.
Absolutely. And I just want to mention the Black Coalition Against COVID-19. We did a whole show with Dr. Reed Tuckson last week. And one of the things, I'm on the steering committee of this organization, one of the things that we've done is actually give information to doctors and dentists that they can use to help bring patients back into their office, because that's been part of the disconnect is people are afraid to go to doctors' offices. So if you're afraid to go see your doctor, your dentist, not only are you missing out on preventive health care, but you're also missing out on any information that they could tell you to help deal with the very information gap that Russ is saying exists. And Russ,
Dr.
you wanted
Clarke,
to
I do
jump in
want to
there.
add that there's also the economic factor here. A lot of African Americans, a lot of my listeners feel like I can't afford to go to the doctor. Then there's that fear that if I do go, I'm going to get COVID there at the hospital. So we have a number of issues and reasons why we don't do it. The beginning, we go from, well, if you're asymptomatic, you don't need to be tested. If you think you're around somebody that has it, you don't need to be tested. Well, now that you do. So it's easy to confuse the public. And I'm not saying that Black folks are not able to obtain this information, but when you have so many people that are walking around without masks and making it like it's a political statement, it's like Dr. Redfield said today, if we had a national mandate, 12 to 18 weeks of wearing a mask, we get rid of the pandemic. Yes. And we're not going to be able to do that until there is a change. And I'm sorry, Dr. Mcdougall, I respect that the fact that, you're apolitical on this, but unfortunately, politics is playing a role in this big time. You're politically right or you're politically wrong. And right now, the way we're doing it, we are wrong and people are dying.
So can I speak to that?
Yes, please do, Dr. Mcdougall.
One of the technology advances that has really taken a hold during this pandemic, I saw patients this morning all via technology, telehealth. So my patients, the 9 patients I saw this morning, either through the telephone or their smartphone. So we can order COVID-19 tests without you even coming to the office. We just place the order in the chart. send you to the testing station. So that's one of the advances that have been adopted more readily. Before COVID-19, at our medical center, we were doing like 50 telemedicine visits per month. Now it's close to 3,000. So there's just been a greater adoption. So when you speak to your listeners asking and being concerned about coming into the doctor's visit for a visit, there's that opportunity to use their smartphone to connect with the doctor.
See, they don't know that. And so that is my job. And you know, I only have 67 listeners. So it is hard for me to disseminate that information. But I have a lot of friends that are in the business that have a lot more listeners. And they need to know. I mean, I have to do that. My father's 91. I have to do telehealth sessions all the time. And I understand that. But we have to get people to understand that you're not going to have to bear the burden of an expensive doctor's visit. We have to let people know that, hey, yes, they're trying to get rid of, because COVID-19 is going to become a pre-existing condition.
It is.
With the long haulers and the whole nine. And so we're facing that battle. We have a lot of very frightened people that cannot focus on getting the information and disseminate it to people that really need to know this information.
Well, I think one other part to mention about telehealth, a lot of people might say, well, they don't have the bandwidth or they don't have the computer or the hardware, and all that's legitimate around video visits. But there's a lot of people. I work closely with a federally qualified health center. For people who don't know what that is, that's sort of like the free clinic. And they see a lot of Medicaid patients, and they do telephone visits where you just pick up the telephone and you have an encounter with your doctor that doesn't even have to have the computer or a smartphone or any of those other things, which many people have, but a bunch of people don't. So that's important to keep in mind. Carrie, can you kind of tell us what are some of the pitfalls that you've seen in terms of coverage from journalists around these issues? And also, too, if you could also cover one thing, Russ talked a lot, we talked earlier about the FDA, but also sort of the CDC guidance and how it's changed and sort of getting to the bottom of why that's happened.
First, on the covering this overall, I will point out I did a piece recently for Journalist Resource that has a lot of links to some of the really good studies on this and some interviews. So I think that's a good resource on this. Some of the mistakes, you know, the administration, for their own reasons, they can do what they want to do. They have a lot of background calls, and they'll have a variety of people on these background calls of varied experience. And I've seen people actually quote those, you know, and use that material. And that, I mean, it can be useful material, but it's like anything else, you should vet it. And it is, you don't want to see stories out there, especially things that go out to, you know, let's say the things are in the old days would be like your local newspaper that say a vaccine is coming in October. If you're going to quote that, you need to immediately go to somebody who knows this field. I mean, again, I hate to keep harping on this, but what a missed opportunity, right? Because we're now going to take something that could have been, I mean, it's amazing that we'll have a vaccine next year. If we get it, it's an if, right? But we've turned this home run into something people are going to be disappointed and scared about, right? So that's really bad. That's one of the missteps. In covering CDC and FDA at this point, you need, as you report on anything, any reporter doing any beat, you need sources, right? You need, when the FDA says something or CDC, you need to be able to go to people you trust that you've talked to doctors and researchers. And even if you don't quote them, email them. Is this true? What's the right question? There are great people to follow on Twitter now. To be honest, when all this is happening, there are any number of highly qualified, well-published physicians and researchers who are jumping in. So if I were covering this and it were a new beat to me, I would watch those Twitter feeds and look for some of the smart people and then pull them up. There's something called PubMed and see, has that person ever published anything in this field ever? And if they have, I'd call them up and say, well, what did you think of this? You know, you really, you have to be, we were talking about food, right? You read a label on a can of food. If you're putting this information in people's minds, be very careful. Like you can't just accept what anyone says.
And
So,
you know what, Dan, one thing, can I just add to what Carrie's saying?
yeah,
Because
please do.
I consider myself a journalist. What they have done is that they have compromised the integrity of journalists. If you say something that's counterproductive to what they're saying and the message that they want to get out, their message is to destroy you, to destroy your integrity,
Your credibility,
to compromise you, to discredit you. And so therefore, we have so many people that want to look to Carrie and want to look to these other journalists that have been beaten down and threatened and just to the point where you're scared to even ask a question that you know will be of a benefit to people that need that information.
I have to say that if you're scared to ask a question, you shouldn't be doing this.
Absolutely.
And now I will say I'm a freelancer. I write for a couple of very special publications. I'm in an incredibly great niche, right? I'm the first to confess that. But when I write for the publications I write for as a freelancer, when the president and the White House put out, they have a background call saying they're going to have an executive order, I tell my editor, we're going to write on that when we see the order. Right. And journalists need to do that. I mean, I understand there's competitive pressure, but if you're a journalist and you're putting out a story to your readers based on some whispering that somebody told you and you haven't seen the document yet, you're not doing your job. And you can't be, if you're afraid to ask the question, go home, go do something else. You're not only not doing a service, you're doing an absolute disservice to everybody.
So, yeah, you also brought up Twitter. And I did a whole show about all the Russian bot information that's being spread about vaccines, the misinformation and disinformation that's been spread about vaccines. Dr. Mcdougall, are you seeing that in your practice with your patients? What kind of questions are they coming in with when it comes to the vaccine?
So actually, some of my friends have sent me links to videos and, hey, did you see this? And there were two videos sent that had the same type of conspiracy, and they got Bill Gates in there somewhere, and I refuted those, and so it's a big issue, and there's even like Facebook postings and things with these misinformation stories and things of that sort just is not good. So I take a look at them, refute the misinformation. And the thing about it too, Dr. Clarke, they'll have like a scientist type person and they're speaking scientific lingo. And unless you have like some type of biology degree or something of that sort, it's really hard to sort out. I mean, they're well done, they're well produced, but they fall short and they're lying. So yes, that's an issue. And also, I need to take a picture of some of my patients when they come in. I have patients wearing facial shields and N95 masks. So Russ Parr need to send that to you next time. so patients are. So I know we see people in the community really not paying attention to these issues, and you bring up really important concerns that I think we need to just keep repeating that message, getting trusted messengers out there, putting people in front of them that have a relationship with them. We just got to keep working at it.
I think you bring up a really interesting point there about how well done, how well produced this misinformation is. And I think in order to counteract it, we have to have well produced information as well. And I think we have underestimated how virulent and widespread and well produced the misinformation and the disinformation is, and have not mounted a commensurate response.
I think, Dr. Clarke, can I just add that one of the best things CNN did about a week ago, I haven't seen it since then, and I might have mentioned this to you before, CNN didn't put up a number. They scrolled the names on their screen.
Yes.
And that made such a human difference to me.
Yeah.
It was tough to watch the broadcast because when I saw one name of a person that I knew, it crushed me. But it humanized. It is so easy to look at a number, 205,000 people dead. But when you see their names, it brings on a whole new significance. And so many people want to ask questions. I don't want to be a name on TV.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I think it's so I thought it was a brilliant thing to do, even though it was gut-wrenching to watch.
Yeah.
But it humanized it. And that's that's part of the information that I'm really trying to put out. And that's why I have you on every Tuesday morning, tomorrow morning at 7:45.
I'll be there.
We only have 5 minutes, but we get to what we can get to.
Yeah.
Just because if we reach 1, we could reach 10, and 10 can reach 100. So we're doing what we have to do, but we just have to break it down. I'm not saying simplify it. I'm just saying just keep it real.
Yeah.
Excuse me, doctor. We have a question from Angela Mays in California. She asks, on the community level, what leaders do we hold accountable to ensure our health safety?
That's an excellent question. Dr. McDougall, you want to take that?
So when we speak to the coronavirus pandemic, so this is what happened. We have a 50-state strategy. Each governor declared a public health emergency. So for that state, the health department official for that state, like for Ohio, the Ohio Department of Health, that leader now has authority vested in them through the declaration of a public health emergency. So it's really at the state level where the big decisions are made. However, each local jurisdiction, like I'm in Columbus, we have the Columbus Health Department. And so decisions are made in regards to various restrictions, however. So like this, so requiring people to wear a mask. So our governor and Department of Health, Dr. Amy Acton, they were on it. I mean, they really took some serious steps. They canceled the Arnold Classic in March, and it really made a big difference. But she resigned because she was getting death threats. People were marching, protesting in front of her home. So as we've spoken to earlier here, there's been pushback, and so that lack of a national message of unity has given people freedom, or they think they can just do those types of things without any accountability. So it's usually through the state, working through the local health departments, and then your city government and such.
And also, too, those state health departments take their direction from the national health department, which is the public health department, which is the CDC. And so that's why, on some level, it is equally, if not more concerning about the CDC's changing of the issue of how the virus is spread through micro droplets versus through large droplets. It doesn't seem like it's a big deal. But if you're talking about micro droplets, you're talking about ventilation systems and the importance of ventilation systems. You're talking about the importance of the social distancing of the 6 feet or more. You're talking about not being indoors. Those things are really important when you're talking about very small droplets when you talk versus large droplets when you sneeze or cough. It makes a huge difference as to what you do. And so seeing the CDC change also has repercussions down to the state level as well, the state and local level.
Excuse me, doctor. We have a question from Tish Stevens. She wants to know from Russ, does he hold his counterparts to task in terms of sharing accurate information?
Well, I don't know exactly what my counterparts are doing. I can only speak for myself. I do feel that not enough attention is paid to this. We have to prioritize what's important. And I know what my priority is, and that is survival for every American out there, and that they have the necessary information. I don't know what my cohorts are doing. I know that I have to do what I have to do, and I don't need a pat on the back. I don't need an award. All I know, it has affected me and my family. We have lost dear friends. So this isn't even about, this break will be with just Dr. Melissa Clarke, and then the next break, we're going to do something stupid. If we get information that's real time, that is important to our audience, we will address it immediately. And I don't care if it takes me through the next break. I'm not worried about format. I'm worried about disseminating the information that will help people.
Excellent. And I would encourage you to listen to some of his rants on his social media page. Absolutely.
Excuse me, doctor. We have a question from Angelique Proctor. In Georgia, our governor not only refused to mandate mask wearing, but sued the mayor of Atlanta over the issue. With the lack of national leadership, this leaves us with no direction. What would you suggest?
Dr. Mcdougall, you want to take that one?
So there's a Georgia State Medical Association in the Atlanta area. And the CDC does have information. Oh, this goes back to what Russ Parr was speaking to earlier, and I'll put it in a different way. So for the community, you don't need an order you don't need a law telling you that you should be wearing a mask. You don't need a law stating that you should be 6 feet away. So some of this is that information is out there. It's been shared. We're trying to repeat the message. So I would follow through what your the mayor in Atlanta is saying, because she's speaking truth to the issue. All the rest of that is politics. So listen to who's speaking truth to the issue. Who has your best? Ask yourself this: who has your best interest in mind? The mayor of Atlanta or the other governmental person?
Absolutely. And realize too that there is a tension between economic interests and reopening, or at least it's a false dichotomy, but economic interest and reopening, which is oftentimes what the governor's standpoint is, versus protection of citizens. And it really kind of doesn't make sense that economic issues are prioritized above it, because really the economy is not going to get back until we get control of the virus. But unfortunately, this false dichotomy is created that either the economy or the health interest of the people, when really it's both moving together.
Can I just add one more piece of information
Please
for that?
Do.
So the age-adjusted death rate for African Americans is 3.4 times higher than European Americans. For Latinx, 3.3 times higher than European Americans. Indigenous people, about 3.2 times age-adjusted death rate higher than European Americans. So if there is some racism involved in this decision-making also, you see where certain populations are being more disproportionately affected. So if there's some racist proclivities involved here, that could also be some of this underpinning of not being so concerned about COVID-19 and its manifestations.
Somebody made a decision. It was like, do we make this money and get our economy percolating, or do we die?
But it's not even, I mean, as Dr. Clarke is pointing out, the thing that's so bizarre is that it's not even that, right? It's that you have to get the virus under control to get the economy. So it just, the whole thing doesn't make sense.
Hello?
I
Right.
wanted
that's
to,
also, no, go ahead, Carrie.
we're getting low on time, so I just wanted to make one point. In some of your other shows, Dr. Clarke, you've really gone into the things people are going to need for the winter ahead. That, you know, taking care of your mind, taking care of your body, and you know, we've had this terrible emphasis on these false deadlines for a vaccine that people are going to be very disappointed aren't going to make it. We're going into one terrible winter ahead. So just the more people can do the things that you were talking about, you know, arrange now, get those Zoom calls scheduled with your family, your friends, your church groups, your book club, just get anything people can do now to get mind and body prepared. This is going to be tough.
Yes.
You know what scared me? When Dr. Redfield was testifying on Capitol Hill, and he held up his mask, and he said one thing that just went past everybody. If my body doesn't get an immune response, Dr. Clarke, you know what I'm talking about? What he's saying is not everybody is going to have antibodies.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to get them.
Absolutely.
It's anticipated that only 50% of people, or that the vaccine initially will only be 50% effective.
That went over everybody's head.
Yeah, but the flu
And he was
vaccine,
saying something, he was trying to make a point, but he didn't realize he gave us some information that freaked me out. So you're telling me even if I get the vaccine, it's a 50-50 chance that I'll be protected.
But there's a caveat to that. Yeah, there's a caveat to that. We don't know. And the flu vaccine is about 50% effective. But what that means is it works like a charm for 50% of people. But the other 50%, if they do get the flu, it will be milder. Right. So it's not like that other 50% is just left out in the breeze. There may also be some protective factor that happens, but all that is unclear because we're still in trials and we can't really make any pronouncements until we have that data, which I think is why what Dr. Mcdougall and the NMA is doing in terms of stepping up to the plate and reviewing the data when it comes out, to be able to try to make it plain to anybody who wants to listen. But I know especially the African-American community is just so commendable in terms of what they're doing. I think I see a question about, do you, go ahead.
Clarke, excuse me, doctor. We have a question from superstar singer Will Downing. Do you recommend getting this flu shot?
Dr. Mcdougall?
Yes. And I'll be getting mine. I usually get mine around October, so it'll last through the flu season. And that's another thing, to be able to speak to that. So we want to be confident in the data coming out, so we would feel comfortable ourselves taking the COVID-19 vaccine. So that's, yes.
Absolutely. So, you know, this time has just truly flown by. I think we may have time for one more question. And if we don't, I just want to kind of do a round robin. If we don't have any more audience questions, I want to do a round robin, like 1 minute. What would you say in terms of where to go for trusted health information? Let's start with Carrie.
I would think about the news you're getting, the way, again, like food, right? So if it's a source you've never heard of, check it very carefully. Find some sources, find stories where multiple people are quoted that link to the original documents, that kind of don't read as if they're trying to scare you. So look at I would say stick with a lot of the traditional news sources as much as you could. And, you know, again, just check the quality, but the same way you would check anything you're going to put in your mind, the same way you'd put anything in your mouth, the same kind of thing.
Excellent. Russ?
Google. Any question that you have, first page Googlers, man, you can get that information and then you can double check it. It's like, I had so many listeners calling me about, Russ, should I send my kids to school? The president says it's okay. Well, you have to look to see if the president has been credible with information. You know, he has flip-flopped and changed so many different times. So therefore, I don't think I'm going to listen to him. I'd rather go to Google and ask, Okay, is it okay for my kids to go to school? Can kids carry the disease? Can kids get it? Can they pass from it? That can answer your questions if you don't have the ability to be able to hear somebody like Carrie or Dr. Mcdougall tell you the truth about what you need to do and where to get your information.
And I would also add to that your local and state health department website. If you're going to Google, there are going to be a bunch of things that come up. Which of those do you trust? An academic institution, the website of an academic institution, the website of a state and local health department. Those are great things when the answer comes up to go to. So, Dr. Mcdougall.
Yes, I would say the National Medical Association, and especially so listen about the background story. So if you're hearing that the executive branch overruled the Food and Drug Administration concerning the follow through with the COVID-19 vaccine, red flags should be really going up. So those trials need to be conducted appropriately. With our COVID-19 task force, we're going to be speaking to that. So pay attention to that on the news, especially.
Absolutely. Well, I want to just thank this outstanding panel. Each of you, Russ Parr, Carrie, Dooley Young, and Dr. Leon Mcdougall, you all have been fantastic and given us great information tonight. I just want to close by saying, always too, feel like you can come here. I have a lot of content on my YouTube page, on my Facebook page, that I have really tried to make sure that I have been able to be a trusted voice within this pandemic. And I will continue to do that. And I will continue to promote trusted voices like the National Medical Association, like academic health center websites, like public health, state and local public health departments, because they do have good information if you're trying to figure out who to trust during this pandemic. I'm going to be on the Russ Parr Morning Show tomorrow morning at 7:45 for those of y'all who are awake. Please tune in. And I'll be right back here as well next Monday. So thank you so much for joining. And until I talk to you and see you again, be wise, be well, and be health empowered.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you.